last couple presentations, we're still going strong, ladies and gentlemen, and we're going to welcome on our next guest here. We had a lot of interest in this stock in our chat on Benzinga Pro recently. We had a lot of interest in the YouTube chat a little bit earlier. So without further ado, we're going to be joined with somebody from Neovasc. It's ticker NVCN. We have Bill Little. He is the COO of Neovasc. Bill, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here. Good to see you. Good to hear you. I'll let you take it away, sir.
Okay, great. Thanks for the opportunity. So I will caution investors that we're going to be making some forward-looking statements here. So I would just caution you to familiarize yourself with the forward-looking statements. Neovasc is fundamentally a two-product company. We're going to talk about the reducer device, which you see on the left, which is a device for treating chronic chest pain that isn't helped with stents or bypass surgery or medicines. And we're also going to talk about the Tiara mitral valve replacement device, which is a less invasive way of replacing a diseased mitral valve. And so fundamentally, to highlight our strategy, we're really trying to do three things. First, it's grow reducer revenues. So we are commercially available in Europe. We have a CE mark and we're revenue generating. Last quarter, we were up 130+% year over year and 40+% quarter over quarter. We're about to finish Q3 here and looking forward to presenting our Q3 results in the coming weeks. So growing revenue is really important for us in Europe. We're also focused on expanding reimbursement for the technology in the US and worldwide. And then finally, and perhaps most excitingly, we are on the front edge of initiating a big study in the United States aimed at getting approval for the reducer device in the US. On the Tiara mitral valve, we are currently pursuing a CE mark approval in Europe under the European Medical Device Regulation. That's, call it a year plus away from a regulatory decision in Europe, and we're focused on getting to that decision in the back half of next year. And then finally, it's about managing the cash we have on hand. In January, we raised $72 million, which for a company our size really puts us in a powerful position where we can go execute the plan that we've got now. And so we've streamlined some activities in development around a different approach for our Tiara program. We're focused on the device that is currently under review in Europe. And so reducing expenses and making sure that we optimally use that cash that we've got on hand is really our approach. And so I'll touch a little bit on the market for refractory angina. So this is it's a multi-billion-dollar opportunity. There's about 2 million patients a year that go to get an angiogram, that is a moving x-ray. And the vast majority of those patients are there because they have chest pain. And about a quarter of the time, those patients have wide open vessels. We call that angina with non-obstructive coronary artery disease, or ANOCA. Many of those patients may in fact have microvascular disease. The tiny vessels in the heart may be diseased. And many of those patients that get angiograms go on to get stents or bypass surgery. A little over a million procedures a year in the US, another million in Europe, another million in Asia. And so these patients are there because they have chest pain. And then typically about a quarter of the time after a patient gets a stent or after they get bypass surgery, they still have chest pain. That's the group of patients that we can target with the reducer device. And of course, these are very expensive patients to treat. And frankly, many of them just have no other good options. And so we studied the reducer device in a clinical trial called COSIRA. And we were able to publish the results in the New England Journal of Medicine. We met the primary endpoint. And I'll briefly walk you through what the study was about. So we took patients that had bad chest pain. And you can see at the bottom of the slide, there's 4 classes of chest pain. The higher the number, the worse your chest pain is, to where these patients that are class 4 have chest pain at rest. They can be sitting on a couch and they still have chest pain. And so we took 2 groups of patients. One group had a sham procedure, that is, they didn't actually get the device implanted. The other group actually got the device implanted. Now, the patients didn't know which group they were in. They were blinded to the result, and that's what's called a sham study. And so what you see at baseline on the left, most of the patients were class 3 and class 4. And then on the right, at 6-month follow-up, you can see in the dark blue, the patients felt a lot better. They moved down to class 1 or class 2 in many cases. In the light blue, you see the placebo effect. Those were the patients that didn't actually have anything done, but yet they still felt a little bit better. And so the reason this trial was so important is that we did this placebo or sham procedure on half, and the patients didn't know which group they were in. And you can see, despite the placebo effect, the folks that actually got the treatment did better than the folks who didn't get the treatment. And thus, we hit the primary endpoint, and of course, we published here in the prestigious New England Journal of Medicine. So we're commercial in Europe. We conducted, or we're actually currently conducting, a post-approval study. And in fact, earlier this week, this study, an interim analysis of this study was published in a prestigious journal called Eurointervention. You may have seen a press release we put out earlier this week about these results. And so what we did is we did real-world patients in Europe that had an approved device that we sold to the hospitals, and then we tracked those patients. And you can see, even as quick as 6-month follow-up, we saw huge improvements, 1 or 2 class improvements in these patients. And now we have some patients that are out as far as 5 years, and you can see the results are sustained, or if anything, they may in fact get a little bit better. So what's happening in the real world matches what we saw in the sham-controlled, randomized controlled trial. And so in the United States, we're about to commence COSIRA 2. And so this is a 380 patient trial that we're going to study up to 50 centers, and probably 40 or so of those will be in the US, maybe 10 or so will be in Canada. And what we're going to do is run essentially a trial very similar to COSIRA 1 that will be sham-controlled, randomized, double-blind, at the highest level of evidence essentially that there is. And we're going to investigate these patients in North America with an aim of getting approval in the US. And we're led by really a who's who of the interventional cardiology community. Greg Stone and Tim Henry are the co-principal investigators of the study. And then you can see Drs. Jeremias, Dr. Jolliker, and Dr. Sharma make up the rest of the executive steering committee. And I won't go into the details on these folks, but needless to say, this is a prestigious group of well-regarded physicians that we've got to help guide us in the trial. I mentioned reimbursement was a big part of our strategy. And so actually effective later this week, we've been doing quite a bit of work in the United States and outside the US to gain reimbursement for the device. Effective in October, there's a new procedure code, a new ICD-10 procedure code, which is how physicians and hospitals code the work they do to get reimbursed, specific for the coronary sinus reduction device. So we worked with CMS to get these codes established. Also later this week, beginning October 1st, you can see there are 2 new DRG codes, which is how hospitals get reimbursed and how they code procedures. And you can see the corresponding payment rates for the procedures using the coronary sinus reducer. On top of that, we went to CMS last year, and in fact in May, CMS came out and they proposed to give us a new technology add-on payment for the device. The reducer device has what's called breakthrough status from the FDA. And because of that, we're able to get faster interactions with FDA, and potentially we may be able to be eligible for incremental reimbursement. So we worked with CMS to target a new technology add-on payment. CMS agreed with us. They proposed a $9,700 add-on payment on top of the procedure reimbursement, assuming we get FDA approval. Once we heard from the FDA that they wanted us to go back and run a trial, obviously we've withdrawn that application, but it does give us good comfort that I think CMS potentially sees value in the technology as well. And when we ultimately do get to the United States, assuming we do get to the United States, we're going to go back and seek that incremental reimbursement again. Outside of the US, we're also working on international reimbursement. We have what's called NUB Status 1 in Germany, which essentially is the highest level of device reimbursement where hospitals can go individually apply for reimbursement. We commercially sell in Germany right now. We have one single price across the entire country, and we do have a direct sales team of 4 folks in Germany where we are direct. We're targeting full national coverage where hospitals wouldn't even have to go hospital by hospital, and we're expecting a decision on that in the back half of this year. In the United Kingdom, we were just granted what's called a HCTED, or high cost tariff excluded device reimbursement, where there is now dedicated reimbursement for the reducer device in England. Hospitals essentially can directly bill the cost of the device to the NHS in England. And earlier this month, we went through our second Interventional Procedures Advisory Committee review meeting, where NICE, which is sort of the governing body of healthcare economics in the United Kingdom, is looking to issue guidance around reducer therapy. And both of those meetings went quite well. We're really looking forward to the final recommendation coming out from NICE. Hopefully here in the next several months, we'll get that final guidance from NICE. In France, we have ongoing discussions with the reimbursement authorities there. We've had a couple of, we'll call them hearings with the French authorities, and they've most recently counseled us to target essentially an annual reimbursement process. We're going to submit that document here in the coming days back to the French authorities, looking for reimbursement similar to what we have in Germany, where it's an annual process. And we're quite hopeful that we'll have that decision here by the end of this year. And then finally, we're also under review in the Netherlands, looking for a reimbursement decision in the first half of next year there. I mentioned earlier that microvascular disease may be an emerging target for the reducer therapy. There are a couple of studies that are ongoing, a randomized trial called COSIMA out of the University of Mainz in Germany, and then an investigator-initiated study here in the United States that the Mayo Clinic went to the FDA and is running their own pilot study specifically looking at microvascular dysfunction. So we're encouraged that folks are investigating it for this disease state, and it represents another potential market for us. I'm going to shift gears over to the Tiara device quickly. So the Tiara device is designed to treat mitral regurgitation, and it's another absolutely gigantic market. Over 5 million patients in the US, another 5 million in Europe suffer from mitral regurg. We expect this is going to be a $2+ billion revenue market in the next couple of years. And the reason is that patients that have mitral regurgitation do so poorly. And if we have less invasive ways of safely treating these patients, we think we can treat more patients than are being treated today. And so our device is called the Tiara transapical mitral valve replacement device. And it essentially is put in through a keyhole incision between two ribs on a beating heart. The standard of care today for replacement surgery is to crack open a patient's chest, to put them on a heart-lung bypass machine, to stop the heart, to cut open the heart, sew in a new native valve, sew up the heart, hit the patient with a defibrillator and hope that their heart starts again, and then sew them back up. And many of these patients who are frequently in their 80s are unable to undergo that surgery. So we believe by having a less invasive way that can be done on a beating heart through that keyhole incision really represents a potentially transformational way of performing these procedures. And so the prognosis for these patients is really poor. In fact, over half of patients that are diagnosed with functional mitral regurgitation, which is the type we treat, are dead within 5 years. And you know, another thing to consider is that if these patients go on to have surgery, this is a relatively complex slide looking at what happens to patients that have replacement surgery. And most of these patients are what are considered high risk. You can see the orange and blue chart on the left. And when these patients that are high risk for surgery undergo these procedures, they have really tough outcomes. You can see over on the right in the high risk category, 5% of them have stroke, 15% of them die, 42% of them have some major morbidity, 35% require prolonged ventilation. And we all know in the era of COVID what ventilation potentially can mean for patients. And so these surgeries are really tough on patients, which is why a less invasive way of doing it is so important. And so we've treated 83 patients to date with the Tiara device. And in the top row, the overall results is an aggregation of the three sub-studies, we'll call them, that we've done below. And you can see that both procedurally, the patients do very well, and you know, we have very good acute procedural outcomes with these patients. More importantly, if we look at how the valve is functioning, on the left at baseline, you can see most of these patients have moderate to severe or severe mitral valve insufficiency. That is, their mitral valve doesn't coapt very well, and they have regurgitation back into the left atrium. And by the time we discharge them at day 10, you can see these patients turn from red to green. That is, they get into none to trace or mild valve insufficiency. And that is because we're putting in a mitral valve that works in place of one that wasn't working very well prior to that. And perhaps more importantly, these patients feel better. So if we look at their New York Heart Association classification of how they feel, you can see at baseline, most of them are class 3 or class 4 patients. That is, they feel really bad. And by the time they're discharged, you can see they're already starting to feel better. But as that heart remodels over time, they feel better and better over time. So we know that we can perform these procedures very safely acutely. The acute outcomes look really good. And over time, these patients feel better because their valve is functioning better. And so, like I said earlier, we're targeting a CE mark decision under the European Medical Device Regulation in the back half of next year. We're doing some finite element analysis work, that's some R&D work to characterize the device performance over time. Then we will undertake fatigue testing to demonstrate to the regulators the durability of the device over time that matches with that FEA analysis. And then again, we're targeting that regulatory decision in the back half of next year. And so we've laid out some really clear value creation milestones for ourselves. You can see a couple of them we've already hit this year. That is getting that incremental reimbursement in the UK, enrolling the first patient at that University of Mainz COSIMA trial. We're looking for that French decision by the end of this year, and that remains on track. And we're looking to enroll the first patient in our COSIRA 2 randomized controlled trial in North America later this year, and that also remains on track. And so we've got a lot to look forward to. You can see in the out years what's going to happen. We're focused on and executing in 21. As we move into 22, we remain on track for those milestones as well. And so I'll summarize by saying that we've got these two great products, both which are serving large underserved patient populations. We have a very clear execution strategy, and Neovasc really is an execution story. At this point, it's about driving adoption of Reducer, getting the trial going in the United States, getting the regulatory decision around Tiara TA, and then being smart in how we utilize the cash that we raised earlier this year. So I'll pause there and wrap it up and take any questions that you might have. Hopefully this gives you a good perspective of what we're focused on here at Neovasc.
Absolutely did, Bill. I have a couple quick questions for you. Maybe you'd be answered. Maybe I throw some tough questions at you that you can't answer right away. I think you're ready for it though. So here's the easy one. As far as reimbursement, are you looking anywhere outside of Europe and North America right now?
There's some other markets that we're looking to go into. So we'll go into Latin America next year.
Okay.
We're going to anchor that around Brazil. Once we believe we have a good regulatory path in Brazil, then we'll go into the rest, or we'll go into, I'll say, additional markets in Latin America. But we want to make sure we've got a big enough market that will justify, entering that market. And Brazil certainly represents that in Latin America. We're also planning to head into Australia. That'll be our first entry into Asia. And Australia will serve as our anchor market going into that market. The reimbursement there is a little bit different. You can get reimbursed under what's called special access as you pursue coverage through TGA, which is the regulatory body in Australia. They have a private system and a public healthcare system. We will target both, initially targeting the public healthcare system, and then ultimately aiming to get into the private system as well.
Gotcha. Okay. And so I know I'm getting way ahead of myself here, but let's say it's 2026. What is the sales breakdown look like between Tiara and the Reducer? Can you comment on that at all?
Yeah, I mean, so no, the short answer is no. I'm not going to give projections of what we're going to do in 26. And really that's going to be contingent upon if we're able to get approval for Reducer, Tiara in Europe, and then ultimately get approval for Reducer in the United States. But needless to say, both of these markets are billion-dollar plus markets. And if we are successful executing these strategies, I think we've got tremendous upside in terms of the markets.
Really liked how you put it, Bill, calling it an execution play. Leave it up to your team. We've got the plan. Now we just got to go execute on it.
That's right. That's right.
Awesome. Neovasc, NVCN is the ticker. This was Bill Little. He's COO of Neovasc. Thanks so much for joining us today, Bill.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's great.